John Kelly sat at the small kitchen table, scribbling the final words of the note he was about to leave behind. His hand shook slightly, not from guilt but from the weight of the decision. He wasn't afraid to leave, nor did he regret it. The week he'd spent living with Layla Gray had been nothing more than a fleeting attraction, a relationship that held no substance, no depth. Layla had been beautiful, charming, everything a man like John would be drawn to. But love? That wasn't part of the equation. He glanced at the clock on the wall. 4:30 a.m. The San Francisco sky was still dark, and Layla was fast asleep in the bedroom, unaware that when she woke up, she'd find only an empty bed and a few hastily written words. John had always prided himself on being practical, and this was just another practical decision. The note read, "Layla Gray, I am leaving for good. Don't try to contact me because I will not answer any call from you. I am changing my cell phone number right away, today. Thank you for everything. John Kelly." There was nothing else to say. Without a moment's hesitation, John folded the note in half, placed it in the middle of the table, and grabbed his suitcase. The apartment, owned by Layla, was hers to live in. John had only been there for a week, and while the physical connection had been undeniable, the emotional one had been non-existent. Silently, he slipped out of the door, careful not to wake her. The Uber he'd ordered was already waiting downstairs, ready to take him to the airport. He had a flight to New York to catch, a flight that would take him back to his real life. John didn't even glance back at the apartment building as the car pulled away. He didn't owe Layla an explanation beyond what he'd written. There was no real love between them, no deep connection to mourn. She was beautiful, yes, but their relationship had been shallow, fueled by physical attraction and nothing more. That was all it had ever been, and that was all it ever would be. As the Uber sped toward the airport, John thought of his life in New York. His father, Robert Kelly, a self-made millionaire, had built a successful fast food empire that operated across America. John worked for his father as an accountant, the only son and heir to the business. In New York, he had Chloe Jenkins, a girlfriend who was just as beautiful as Layla but with more substance, more potential for a future. Chloe was someone he could see himself building a life with, even though the word commitment still made him uncomfortable. He boarded the flight without a second thought about the life he'd left behind in San Francisco. Layla was part of his past now, a past that didn't matter. 12 years passed without a word from Layla. John never gave her another thought, not after he settled back into his New York life. He continued working for his father, expanding the business, living a comfortable life. Chloe remained a constant presence, though they never married. They were happy enough, or at least content, and John had no reason to disrupt the life he'd carefully built. One sunny afternoon, John sat at a trendy restaurant in New York, having lunch with his office mate, Jason. It was one of those upscale places where businessmen went to talk deals and unwind. John had been there 100 times before, never expecting anything unusual. But today was different. Jason was in the middle of a story about a recent client when John's gaze wandered across the room. His heart nearly stopped when he saw her. Layla. She hadn't changed much in the past 12 years, still as beautiful and elegant as ever. But what caught his attention even more was the boy sitting across from her, maybe 11 or 12 years old. John's breath hitched. The boy looked startlingly familiar. His dark hair, his eyes, even the way he held himself. It was like looking into a mirror of his younger self. John's pulse quickened. Could it be? No, it couldn't. But as he continued to watch them, the resemblance became undeniable. The boy with Layla looked exactly like him, his eyes, his nose, his mouth. Every feature seemed to mirror John's. He felt a wave of panic wash over him. Layla hadn't noticed him. She was engrossed in a conversation with the boy, who seemed utterly relaxed in her presence. John wanted to get up, to walk over and confront her, but he was frozen in his seat. What could he even say? After all these years, how could he explain himself? The last time he'd seen Layla, he'd left her a note on the kitchen table and disappeared from her life. Now, to walk up to her out of nowhere would be the height of arrogance and awkwardness. He couldn't face her. Not here, not now. John stayed in his seat, feeling paralyzed by the weight of his past. He watched as Layla and the boy finished their lunch and left the restaurant. She never looked in his direction, never knew he was there. But the image of that boy stayed with John long after they were gone. Days passed, but John couldn't get the encounter out of his mind. The boy, Matthew, haunted him. He was sure now that the child was his, the product of his brief relationship with Layla 12 years ago. But what could he do about it? Layla hadn't contacted him, hadn't tried to reconnect after all these years. Perhaps she had moved on and wanted nothing to do with him. John was still grappling with these thoughts when, a few weeks later, he received an unexpected email. The subject line read, "Board of Directors Appointment." Confused, John opened it to discover that he had been appointed to the board of directors for a top AI company. He was even more surprised to see that one of the other appointed directors was Layla Gray. He arrived at the first board meeting with a mixture of curiosity and dread. He hadn't seen Layla since that day at the restaurant, but now they would be forced to face each other in a professional setting. As he walked into the sleek boardroom, his eyes immediately found her. Layla looked every bit as composed and beautiful as she had been in the restaurant. But there was something different about her now. A confidence, a quiet strength that hadn't been there 12 years ago. When their eyes met, John could see the shock on her face. She hadn't expected to see him either. For a moment, neither of them moved. The weight of their shared past hung between them, unspoken but undeniable. The meeting proceeded, filled with discussions about business strategies and financial projections, but John barely paid attention. His mind was on Layla and the boy, his son. He had to know the truth. Was Matthew really his? And if so, what did that mean for his future? During the recess, John finally gathered the courage to approach her. They stood in a quiet corner of the boardroom, away from the other directors. "Layla," he began, his voice low, "I need to ask you something." She crossed her arms, her expression unreadable. "What is it, John?" "The boy," John said, swallowing hard. "The one with you at the restaurant. Is he mine?" Layla's eyes flickered, but her expression remained calm. "Yes, John. Matthew is your son." John felt a rush of emotions. Guilt, regret, fear. He had abandoned Layla all those years ago, never knowing she was pregnant. Now he had a son who didn't even know him. "Why didn't you tell me?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Layla's eyes hardened. "Because you left, John. You made it clear that you didn't want to be part of my life. I wasn't going to chase after you with the news of a pregnancy." John nodded, feeling the weight of her words. He had no defense, no justification. He had left her without a second thought, and now he was paying the price. "Can I meet him?" John asked. "I want to know him, to be part of his life." But Layla shook her head. "Matthew doesn't want to meet you. He knows what you did, how you abandoned me. He hates you for it, John. He doesn't want you to be his father." John felt a lump form in his throat. The rejection stung more than he'd expected. He had a son, but that son wanted nothing to do with him. "If you need proof," Layla added, "you can take a DNA test, but the result won't change how Matthew feels about you." John nodded. "I'll take the test," he said quietly. "I need to know for sure." The DNA test confirmed what John had already suspected. Matthew was indeed his son, but the confirmation brought little solace. Matthew still refused to meet him, and Layla made it clear that she wouldn't force him to. John was left feeling helpless, unsure of how to bridge the gap between himself and his son. He tried reaching out to Layla, hoping she might be willing to facilitate some kind of relationship between him and Matthew, but she remained firm. Matthew wanted nothing to do with him, and she wouldn't push the issue. John threw himself into his work, trying to distract himself from the pain of rejection. But no matter how hard he worked, the thoughts of Matthew lingered. It had been a few months since the DNA test confirmed John as Matthew's father. The news hadn't been much of a surprise to him, but the emotional aftermath had left John struggling with his feelings of guilt and regret. He knew he had made a terrible mistake by abandoning Layla all those years ago, but it was Matthew's rejection that stung the most. The knowledge that his son hated him felt like a weight on his chest that he couldn't shake. But John wasn't the type to give up easily. He knew he couldn't undo the past, but he could still try to make amends, even if Matthew wasn't ready to meet him. One day, as he sat in his office, John had an idea. Matthew's birthday was coming up. Perhaps he could send him a gift, a small gesture to show that he cared. It wouldn't erase the years of absence, but it might be a step toward building a bridge between them. The idea gnawed at him all afternoon until he couldn't resist the urge to reach out to Layla. He hadn't spoken to her since the DNA test results came back, respecting her space and Matthew's feelings. But now he needed her help, if only for advice on what gift would mean the most to Matthew. That evening, John sent Layla a carefully worded email. "Hi Layla, I hope you and Matthew are doing well. I know things have been complicated between us, but I've been thinking a lot about Matthew lately. His birthday is coming up, and I wanted to send him a gift. I was hoping you could give me some advice on what he might like. I don't want to overstep, and I certainly don't want to cause any more tension, but I thought it might be a small way to start rebuilding things. Thanks, John." He wasn't sure if she would respond, but the next morning, his phone pinged with a new message from Layla.
John.
"Matthew and I are fine, thank you. I think it's a kind gesture for you to want to send him a birthday gift. I'll be honest, he's still not ready to meet you, but I won't stop you from trying to be part of his life. If you're not sure what to get him, you can ask me about the price range you're thinking of, and I'll suggest something he might really appreciate. Best, Layla." John felt a sense of relief wash over him. Layla's response wasn't exactly warm, but it wasn't a complete rejection either. He had a chance, a small one, but a chance nonetheless. John immediately replied, "Thanks for getting back to me, Layla. I've been thinking about something in the range of $1,000 to $1,500. I want it to be special, but I also don't want it to feel like I'm just trying to buy his affection. Let me know what you think." Layla's response came quickly. "That's a generous amount. Matthew's current iPhone is 5 years old, and he's been talking about wanting a new one. If you want to make an impact, the latest iPhone would be a great gift. It's something he needs, and it shows that you're paying attention to what's important to him. I think he would really appreciate that. Best, Layla." John smiled. The latest iPhone, it was perfect. It wasn't just an extravagant gift. It was practical, something Matthew would actually use and enjoy. More importantly, it was something that showed John was trying to understand his son's needs. Without hesitation, he placed the order for the newest model, having it gift-wrapped and delivered directly to Layla's apartment in New York, where they had recently moved for Layla's job commitments. He also added a note. "Happy birthday, Matthew. I know we haven't had a chance to get to know each other, but I hope this gift is something you'll enjoy. I'm sorry for everything, and I hope one day we can talk. Your father, John Kelly." After sending the gift, John felt a mixture of nerves and hope. He knew this gesture wouldn't change everything overnight, but it was a start. Now all he could do was wait. The days that followed were agonizing for John. He constantly checked his phone, waiting for some kind of response from Layla, an update on whether Matthew had received the gift, or if he'd even acknowledged it. But days passed, and there was nothing. Finally, a week after Matthew's birthday, John received an email from Layla.
John.
"Matthew got your gift, and he was genuinely happy with it. He didn't say much, but I could tell he appreciated it. He's still not ready to talk to you, but I wanted to let you know that the gesture wasn't ignored. Thanks for being thoughtful. Layla." It wasn't much, but it was something. John let out a long breath, feeling a small glimmer of hope. Matthew had accepted the gift, and that was more than he dared to hope for. Maybe, just maybe, this was the beginning of something. A small crack in the wall that Matthew had built between them. But John knew this was just the first step. Winning his son's heart would take time, patience, and more than just material gifts. He needed to find a way to show Matthew that he was serious about being part of his life, that he wasn't going to abandon him again. With the iPhone as a small success, John realized that the key to winning Matthew over would be consistency. He couldn't swoop in with one grand gesture and expect everything to be forgiven. He needed to show Matthew that he was here for the long haul, that he was willing to put in the effort to be a father. John continued reaching out to Layla, asking for updates on Matthew's life. Slowly, She began to open up more, sharing little details about their day-to-day routines, what Matthew enjoyed doing, and his hobbies. John learned that Matthew was interested in coding and had recently started learning to build his own apps. He was smart, independent, and fiercely loyal to his mother. John also found out that Matthew loved basketball and often played at the local community center after school. This gave John an idea. He asked Layla if it would be okay for him to send Matthew tickets to an upcoming NBA game in New York, something special that they could experience together if Matthew ever wanted to meet him. Layla agreed, though she made it clear that Matthew still wasn't ready for face-to-face contact. John understood, but he wasn't discouraged. He sent the tickets anyway, along with another note. Matthew, I heard you're a big basketball fan. I got you some tickets to a game, no pressure, but if you ever want to go, they're yours. I hope you have a great time. Your father, John. This time, the response came much quicker. Layla emailed John 2 days later. Matthew got the tickets and was really excited. He's planning to go with one of his friends. I think he's slowly warming up to the idea of talking to you, but he's still not ready yet. I just wanted to let you know that you're on the right track. Best, Layla. John felt a surge of optimism. He was finally making progress, albeit slowly. It wasn't about winning Matthew over with gifts. It was about showing him that John cared, that he was paying attention to the things that mattered to him. Weeks turned into months, and though Matthew still hadn't reached out directly, John continued his efforts. He sent thoughtful gifts, always consulting Layla first, and kept up the communication with her. The tension between John and Layla had eased, and they'd fallen into a comfortable rhythm of co-parenting from a distance, even though Matthew didn't yet acknowledge John as his father. Then, one day, John received an unexpected email from Matthew. John, I got the tickets. Thanks. I had a good time at the game with my friend. I'm not sure if I'm ready to meet you yet, but I thought I should say thanks. Matthew. John stared at the email in disbelief, reading it over and over. It was short, almost hesitant, but it was the first time Matthew had reached out to him directly. It was a breakthrough, small but monumental. His son, the boy who had once hated him, was now at least willing to open a line of communication. John's heart swelled with a mixture of relief and hope. This was the first real step toward building a relationship with Matthew. It wasn't going to happen overnight, but John was ready to be patient. For the first time in years, he felt like he had a real chance to make things right. As months passed, the emails between John and Matthew became more frequent. They started talking about basketball, coding, and everyday life. The conversation was still guarded, but John could sense that Matthew was slowly warming up to him. He didn't push for more than Matthew was willing to give, knowing that trust would take time to rebuild. One day, out of the blue, Matthew asked, "Do you want to come to my next basketball game? It's nothing big, just a school game, but if you're around, you can come watch." John felt a lump rise in his throat as he read the message. It was a simple question, but to John, it was everything. Matthew was finally ready to meet him. He replied immediately, "I'd love to, Matthew. Just let me know the time and place, and I'll be there." The journey had been long and filled with uncertainty, but John knew that the road to redemption was never easy. He wasn't looking for forgiveness overnight. He was just looking for a chance, and Matthew had finally given him that. As John prepared to attend Matthew's game, he couldn't help but feel a surge of gratitude. It was a new beginning, one he was determined not to squander. He had missed out on 12 years of his son's life, but now he was ready to make up for lost time. And this time, he wasn't going anywhere. Thank you so much for staying with me until the end of the story. If you felt the emotional twist of this tale, then I have done a good job. This kind of story reminds us the complications that exist in our world and how sometimes the unexpected happen when least expected. If you enjoy this, please don't forget to hit the like button, share your thought in the comment, and of course subscribe to the channel for more stories that narrate deep into the daily human experiences. Until next time, stay curious and stay inspired. I'll see you in the next video.